Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive with us.
Um,
This time we're going to be talking about AI and human values,
okay.
which sounds very abstract, but I think you'll see it gets very real very quickly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I mean,
got it.
it's one of the most pressing issues, I think, facing us right now. And it's not just robots taking over jobs. It's more fundamental than that. It's like how AI could end up changing how we think, how we make decisions, what we think is important in the first place.
Yeah, and thankfully the piece that we're looking at today really gets into that. It's an essay by Paula Boddington, who's a researcher
Mm-hmm.
who specializes in AI ethics, and is a great read.
Yeah, and refreshingly, it kind of skips over all the usual killer robot tropes and goes right to the heart of it. You know, how AI might
Yeah.
subtly but very powerfully reshape our values.
Exactly. And one of the things that I thought was very interesting was this washing machine analogy.
Oh, yeah.
So it's not about robots doing our laundry. It's about AI deciding what clean even means.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right. And that's just laundry. Like, think about applying that same logic to justice or healthcare. It gets scary pretty fast.
Yeah, it is a little unnerving when you start thinking about it in those terms.
And the point she makes is the washing machine didn't just clean clothes, it shifted our values.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what we consider to be clean, what our standards of hygiene are, how we divide up housework, even gender roles to some extent.
Wow.
So, that was just for laundry. And AI is being applied to much more fundamental things,
Yeah.
thought processes,
Yeah.
decision making.
It's almost like sneaking in through the back door
Mm-hmm.
while we're busy looking at the shiny new tick. You know what I mean?
Yeah, she calls it change blindness. We adapt so quickly to new technology that we kind of miss
Yeah.
how it's reshaping what we care about, what we value.
Totally. And she brings up a good example about how our attitudes toward data privacy
Oh, yeah.
have shifted.
Yeah.
We're more and more giving up our information,
Mhm.
even as we grow more wary of who's controlling it.
Right. And it's interesting because that's a value shift that's already happened. We can see that in retrospect, but it happened without us realizing it, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. And that kind of shift is exactly what AI could accelerate.
Exactly.
So let's look at some of these strengths that AI has, and then we can talk about how those strengths could have
Okay.
unforeseen consequences,
Yeah. So one of the big ones is data-driven decision making, right?
Right.
And there's a lot of obvious benefits to that. Imagine self-driving cars that can instantly learn from each other's accidents,
Right.
constantly improving safety through this kind of shared data.
So that's like the hive mind at its best,
Yeah.
constantly learning, evolving.
Exactly. But then Boddington brings up this example of AI in medicine, which is where it gets a little more complicated.
Okay, so where do we see a potential problem there?
Well, so AI is great at, analyzing medical images, right?
Yeah.
Spotting tiny details that humans might miss, which is hugely valuable for diagnoses.
We're talking faster, more accurate diagnoses.
Yeah, but the thing is, medical care isn't just about crunching data.
Right.
It's about understanding individual patients,
Oh.
making judgment calls based on experience and intuition, that human element.
So are you saying that over-reliance on AI could lead to like a medical monoculture where it's kind of pushing everyone towards the same thinking potentially
Yeah.
at the expense of a patient's needs?
And that raises the question of whether faster diagnosis is always the best outcome. What if a slightly less efficient approach is actually more effective for a particular patient,
Right.
their particular circumstances?
It's like the more efficient we get, the less we value the individual and all the nuances that come with that. Yeah. The imperfections even.
And that same tension between efficiency and individual values plays out in other areas, too.
Oh, yeah.
Like, she uses this thought experiment about juries. Imagine an AI that could guarantee a correct verdict every time.
Wow.
Would we want that?
Well, I mean, on the surface, it sounds great, but
Yeah, but the point is we value human judgment. The whole history of legal rights and the role of juries as a check on power, that all gets lost.
and I think that's a good point, too, because like a jury is good because it's pulling from different perspectives
Exactly.
and different backgrounds and things like that. And AI would kind of get rid of that.
And AI, by its very nature, tends toward this kind of homogenization, right?
Right.
So its strength, its ability to kind of pool information and find patterns, can also be a weakness when it comes to certain values,
Yeah.
like individual judgment.
So it's not about AI being good or bad.
Right.
It's about being aware of the trade-offs.
Exactly.
Just because a machine can do something faster or more efficiently.
Right.
Doesn't mean it should.
Doesn't mean we should let it.
Right. And that kind of leads me to another point that I thought was interesting
Yeah.
about AI being used to detect hate speech online,
Oh, yeah.
like the online hate index that the ADL is working on. And I was curious about what you thought about that, because isn't there a kind of irony there?
There is. It's like
Yeah.
we've created this problem with technology, these online platforms, and now we're turning to technology to try to fix it.
Right. And the essay points out, too, that offensive or hateful speech,
Oh, right.
it's not a new thing.
It's not a new thing at all. Yeah.
She even uses the example of like Descartes,
Oh, yeah.
dissing another mathematician.
Right.
So it's
So
like,
it's like AI is being presented as this magical solution, but the underlying issue, which is how do we deal with hate speech in society, that problem doesn't just go away.
right, it's still there.
AI can't fix that for us,
Yeah, and it makes you think, too, about like what even is hate speech?
Right.
Like, who gets to decide that?
That defines it.
What about censorship?
Yeah.
All these things.
Those are human questions. AI can't answer those for us.
Exactly. And again, it comes back to being thoughtful about how we use AI
Right.
and recognizing its limitations alongside its strengths.
We need to weigh its strengths, like data sharing potential for bias reduction, speed, and efficiency, against other values. And sometimes those values, freedom of expression, nuanced judgment, the right to a fair trial, might be more important.
So where do we even draw the line? It feels like AI is moving so fast that we're kind of always playing catch up with the ethics. You know what I mean?
And that's a challenge we all face, not just AI experts or policymakers. It's all of us.
Yeah.
We need to be part of this conversation, and that's what Boddington's essay is trying to do, is give us a framework.
Yeah, I feel like I'm much more equipped to have that conversation now. But before we get into more specifics, what else did she have to say about how AI might affect our values?
So she highlights some interesting examples like personal autonomy and how AI could impact that.
Okay.
Like imagine a world where AI is making more and more of our decisions for us.
Mm-hmm.
What we eat, what we buy, who we date.
Okay, so that does start to get into some interesting territory about like what it means to be human.
Right.
In an AI.
In an AI-driven world.
Yeah, I'm ready to unpack all that.
Yeah.
I'm ready to unpack all that.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack.
For sure. One of the examples that she brings up is this idea of a boy getting a robot to bake cookies for his parents.
Oh, yeah.
And, one parent's like, oh, that's cute, but did he really make them?
Right. It kind of gets to the heart of what we value, right?
Exactly.
Like effort, authenticity, maybe even a little imperfection.
Yeah.
It's not just about the cookies, it's about the process.
Totally.
And it makes you think, like, what happens when AI starts taking over more and more of those processes, those human endeavors that we associate with skill or creativity, even love in some cases.
So it's like AI making us lose sight of the human element, even in something as simple as baking cookies.
Exactly.
Wow.
And this tension between efficiency and human values plays out in bigger things, too, like healthcare, Okay.
Imagine an AI that develops a super efficient, standardized treatment plan.
Sounds great.
Yeah, on the surface, it sounds amazing.
Yeah.
But what Boddington argues is that a slightly less efficient treatment might actually be better for a specific patient, taking into account, their individual circumstances, their preferences, even their values.
Yeah.
AI, with its focus on optimization, could end up pushing us toward this one-size-fits-all approach that overlooks those nuances.
So we're kind of sacrificing individualization in the process of striving for efficiency.
Potentially even compassion, right?
Yeah, it's like we're valuing the outcome over the patient's experience.
That's a really key insight.
Yeah.
And this tension between individual values and collective optimization is something we have to keep in mind as AI becomes more integrated into our lives.
It really makes you think about like what kind of future we're building. Do we want one where everything's just optimized for speed and efficiency?
Even if it means losing some of the things we hold dear, or is there some way to balance, AI with human values?
And that leads to a really crucial question that Boddington brings up, which is what values should guide AI's development and use?
Okay.
That's not just about how AI affects our values. It's about what values we want to bake into AI itself.
Okay, so we're not just reacting to it. We can actually kind of shape its development.
Exactly.
Almost like giving it a moral compass or something.
Exactly. It's about being intentional. If we're designing an AI for healthcare, do we just prioritize efficiency above all else?
Right.
Or do we factor in things like patient autonomy, privacy, compassion.
So it's like we're not just coding algorithms, we're coding values into
Mhm.
these systems.
And that's a huge responsibility.
It is a huge responsibility.
And it's not just up to the tech wizards. It requires this broader societal conversation.
Yeah.
We need to define collectively what kind of future we want to create with AI.
That's a big conversation to have.
It is.
But it's one that we need to have, I think.
Definitely. And Boddington's essay gives us a good place to start.
Yeah, it does. It does. She reminds us that, AI isn't inherently good or bad. It's a tool.
Right.
And like any tool, it depends on how we use it.
That's how we wield it.
Exactly. And so it's not about demonizing AI.
Yeah.
It's about being thoughtful,
Being intentional.
intentional, and maybe even a little skeptical about
Yeah.
the promises of technology.
We need to be aware of the trade-offs, the values that are at stake.
Yeah, and those questions are important for like everyday users of tech,
Right.
just as much as for the people developing it.
We all have a role to play in this.
Totally. I'm curious, what would you say is like one key takeaway you'd want listeners to walk away with today?
I think the most important thing is to remember that AI is not just a technology.
Okay.
It's a reflection of our values, our aspirations, even our fears. The more we understand that, the better equipped we'll be to shape its development.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point. And that actually leads perfectly into our concluding thought for the listener, which is,
Where?
Boddington leaves us with this challenge of like, what values do you want to see
Right.
reflected in the technology you use?
It's a question worth pondering as we navigate this increasingly AI-driven world.
Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, the future of AI is in our hands.
It is.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you and thank our listeners for joining us on this deep dive
My pleasure.
into AI and human values. We hope it sparks some new ideas, maybe even a bit of healthy skepticism about the promises of technology.
Yeah.
Be sure to check out the full Aeon essay by Paula Boddington if you want to learn more. And as always, thanks for listening. So it's fascinating to think about, that we can actually shape these values. But how do we do that?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not a programmer. I'm not, policymaker.
Right.
What can I, as like an average person, do to influence AI?
That's a great question. And it's easy to feel like AI is this massive, complex system that's beyond our control. But the reality is, every time we design an algorithm, every time we make choices about what data to use or what goals to set for an AI system,
Right.
we're embedding values whether we realize it or not.
So they're kind of baked into the technology from the beginning.
Exactly. And that's
Okay.
why it's so important to be intentional about those choices.
Yeah.
Think about it this way. If you were baking a cake, you wouldn't just throw in any ingredients you had lying around.
Right.
You'd carefully select them based on the kind of cake you want to make.
Right. So we're talking about being mindful of the ingredients that go into AI.
Yeah, and it starts with awareness. The more we understand about how AI works,
Okay.
the better equipped we are to make informed choices about the technology we use and support.
So what can we do like on a practical level?
Well, I think it starts with staying informed. Read articles like this one, have conversations with friends and family about these issues. Ask questions about the technology you're using. The more we talk about these things, the more we normalize this conversation about AI ethics.
So just shining a light on it.
Exactly.
Making people aware that these choices are being made.
Yeah, and it's also about being conscious consumers,
Okay.
When you're choosing a product or service that uses AI,
Right.
do some research.
Yeah.
Find out what values are embedded in its design.
Okay.
Support companies that are making an effort to be ethical and transparent about their AI.
Yeah, so we're kind of voting with our wallets in a way.
Exactly. Every choice we make sends a signal to the market, and collectively, those signals can have a huge impact.
Yeah, I mean, that is empowering because sometimes it feels like you're kind of helpless in the face of, this technological advancement that's happening so rapidly. But we actually do have a say.
I do.
It sounds
And the more people who get involved in this conversation, the better.
absolutely. Well, this has been a really eye-opening conversation. What would you say are some final thoughts?
Yeah.
Final thoughts. You want to leave our listeners with?
I'd say just remember AI is not just a technology, it's a reflection of us. Our values, our aspirations, even our fears, and the more we understand that,
Right.
the better equipped we'll be to shape its development.
Well said, well said. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a really fascinating discussion.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has inspired you to think critically about AI and the values we want to embed in this technology. Be sure to check out the full Aeon essay by Paula Boddington for a more in-depth exploration of these ideas. And as always, thanks for listening.